Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this particular video, I'm going to be talking about the total lunar eclipse in Virgo on the 3rd of March. And I'm also going to be looking at what's going on at the time. What are the surrounding dates and the angles being forged between different planets, which of course make a huge difference to the whole narrative that goes with an eclipse. Now, I want to, first of all, let you know when I'm recording this. I'm recording this on the 22nd of February, so about just a little under a week before it will go live. But as you know, things are moving so fast at the moment. Events in the world, I mean, almost now, not just every day, but sometimes in a day, several events, and each one eclipses another. And, we astrologers, especially myself, we're kind of catching up all the time. So I'm certainly aware that in the time before this video goes live, more events will have happened that are worthy of note. But as it is, I'm going to stick to my astrological discipline, talk about what we expect from lunar eclipses, and fit in some of the stories that I think are relevant and help you focus, focus on those. You can see the astrology working through those events. And then, of course, second half of this video, I'm going to be taking it sign by sign so that you get a little bit more of a personal take on what this eclipse will mean. Now, the first thing I want to say about this eclipse, which takes place on the 3rd of March, is that we are nearing the end of a first phase of really significant developments for 2026. They're going to come in tranches. And this is by the time we've seen the lunar eclipse out and we've come to about the 9th of March, we are really, drawing a line under this first phase. And as you can see, we only have to go back to the beginning of this, 19th of January, and to see all the events that have happened in quick succession, whether it's what was happened at Davos, and the whole Greenland business. We've seen all sorts of things, of course, more recently with Peter Mandelson, with the release of yet more of the Epstein files. And of course, the great story taking place as I speak to you is all about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. And we're certainly going to have a brief look at his chart as we make our way through this. So quite a lot to unpack, so I might as well get going. First of all, this eclipse, this total blood moon eclipse, if you get to see it, it's going to be a kind of sandy red. I mean, it'll be pink if you're not in the right area to see the full thing. But I think everywhere there's going to be, it's going to look kind of pale rose color. There's going to be something about the full moon at this time. It's going to look a little different. It's not closer to the Earth, so it's not a supermoon, but it is a blood moon. And the reason for that is just to do with how the shadow of the Earth goes over the moon, and its relation to the sun as well, that causes this phenomenon. In and of itself, I don't think the flat fact that it's a blood moon makes any difference to the interpretation. And in a way, although total eclipses are always more dramatic, we tend to see the whole of the sun blocked out on a total solar eclipse. And with a moon, we get the same effect, sometimes with a ring of fire around it. So they can be dramatic. But it doesn't necessarily mean that these eclipses with names are more important than any others. All eclipses are significant. And of course, this one has a relationship with the one that went before it, the one that's coming after it. So we have a kind of chain of events, a kind of signature of events will be seen to be reflected by this eclipse. If you live in Eastern Asia, Australia, New Zealand, the Pacific, North and Central America, even the west coast of South America, the west of South America, you will be able to see a good part of this eclipse. It will be quite dramatic. But everywhere else, we'll probably see a sort of pale rose imitation of what it is. But again, what is the importance of this? It's the importance that eclipses play in global events and, of course, in our own personal lives. Now, you have to have something in and around 13 degrees of the mutable signs for this eclipse to be making an impact on you. And we can stretch it back into, so we could go from about 10 degrees of the mutable signs to about 15 of the mutable signs. That's Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces, to say, oh, this eclipse is really, connecting with my chart. Therefore, it has a personal message to bring me. It's going to be life-defining in some cases, and just, shall we say, an awakening, a sort of seismic shift that makes you see things in a different way. And in a funny kind of way, I know that we do make a lot of the signs that these eclipses are in. And so we think about what is Virgo. This is the sign of industry, but I don't mean industries in the world. I mean work. When I look at Virgo and I think about this extraordinary sign of service, when we think about what that means in terms of an eclipse, maybe we think of the duties and the responsibilities we have. And I'm going to be picking up on that at the very end of this video. So you don't want to miss the ending this time, because it is loaded with things really that are very, very worth thinking about. But yes, the more important factor with eclipses are how they connect with other planets, especially those planets that are slower moving, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. It's that connection and what's going on at the time that really does have an effect on whether this eclipse is going to be globally extraordinary, or whether it is going to bring situations to a head, as all full moons do. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest event in a year. But all eclipses are worthy of our respect, and very well worth, around the time of an eclipse, is to be fairly careful with our movements, whether I mean, with our bodies, but also I think with what we say, what we set in motion, how we respond to things, because eclipses kind of have a much more substantial effect on the things we do. And therefore we want to be careful to do the right thing and not to do the wrong thing. So other things about eclipses in general, and lunar eclipses, full moon eclipses, is that we're always looking at polarity. So we've got one sign opposite another, and there is a relationship between one sign and its opposite sign. And so when we get things in opposition in a horoscope, then there is a connecting seed, if you like, between the two of them. So another thing to really bear in mind with this idea of polarity is that they promote, or they preside over, union. So things coming together. When you think about the sun and the moon and the whole idea of that opposition, male, female, positive, negative, and we think about that opposition that also has a creative spark. And so we get union with full moon and lunar eclipses every bit as much as we get separation. Things come to a head on a full moon. Simmering issues come to the bubble. And when they're eclipsed, they come to the bubble in a much more profound way, much more noticeable. And certainly when we look at the global stage, then anything that's simmering, comes to a head around the time of an eclipsed full moon. And this either ends chapters, it becomes the end of the matter. There is nothing more to be said, done about it, it's done. Or it marks the beginning of something, because you brought things to a head and now action is to follow. So these are the big themes that we are really looking at when we look at this particular lunar eclipse. I'm going to bring it up in a moment, but there are another important aspect of all full moons or lunar eclipses, solar eclipses, new moons, is that they come in pairs, in the same way that we have a new moon and a full moon in each month. So, and usually they're in one sign and then in the opposite sign. So we have a focus on two particular signs, if you like. So there's always a reference. And in this case, when we look at it this way, we're looking at the previous new moon, which was on the 17th of February. It was a solar eclipse in the sign of Aquarius. So we've got that new moon, and its partner is this full moon on the 3rd of March. So events around that time, whether we're talking about your life, the things that happen in your life that were in your immediate kind of presence, or whether we're looking out there on the world stage and looking at, hey, what happened around that solar eclipse? There will be a connection with events around the time of the lunar eclipse. They come in pairs. But there's another cycle as well. When we think about the new moon in a particular sign 6 months beforehand, and if we're working really with this idea of the lunar eclipse on the 3rd of March being the full moon closure, if you like, the new moon opening, well, we've got two, in fact. We've got one that occurred towards the end of August, around about the 23rd of August, which is a sort of 0 degrees of Virgo. And then we had another one right at the very, very end of Virgo, 29 degrees and 53 minutes. We were 7 minutes out of Libra. And that particular eclipse was opposed to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. All of this plays a part. Again, let's look at it personally. You may want to go back to either late August, or you might want to go back to late September and think about how what's going on now is linked to that time period. There should be a connection. And again, we want to look at events in the world. What was happening in late August? What was happening at the end of September that could play into what's happening around the 3rd of March? Well, one thing is, I remember Putin came to Alaska in the August of last year, and there were big ramifications, in the hopes of peace or something going on with Ukraine. So we've definitely got Ukraine and Russia in the pot when it comes to this eclipse. When we look at the other solar eclipse opposing Saturn and Neptune on the 21st of September last year, what was happening then? We had the royal family in the frame, and this was the beginnings of the really serious affairs of Andrew and questions being related to the future of the monarchy. That all started around that point. And so here we are, solar eclipse of the 17th of February, which saw, it was about 2 days or so before the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Now, he is the first member of a royal family to be arrested since 1647. And that was when Charles I was arrested and taken into custody by the English Parliament. And this was largely, ironically, to do with taxes and the unpopular way he was extorting, so to speak, money from the public. So there was a great upset about that, and the presiding, Oliver Cromwell and his group, if you like, they came forth, and for a brief, 13-year period, there was no monarchy. The monarchy was abolished, and we had this kind of, the government was basically ruling Great Britain, or rather England. So you can see how interesting it is, even if we go back, 300 and odd years to the time of Charles I, who incidentally lost his head because of all of this. And we think, what's going on in the world here? Well, certainly in America, apart from all the revelations that are coming out from the Epstein files, the emails, the videos, the photos, all of it, we've also got taxes in there. We've got tariffs being a whole big issue with the excuse me, with the Supreme Court deciding that it's not constitutional to impose taxes, global taxes or tariffs that the president had done. And then, of course, we have found the president fought back and said, okay, well, this I can do, and I'm still going to do it. So we've got tariffs or taxes in the frame. And of course, the other thing we have in the frame is the royal family. I mean, as I record this for you, you can hardly move around YouTube without somebody talking about the future of the monarchy and everything to do with the Epstein affair and the disgrace of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson. So this is big stuff. It's playing and it's going to play into what's going on at this particular time. And I think in one of my Friday bites, I actually raised the point about this eclipse, the solar eclipse on the 17th of February, being at 28 degrees of Aquarius, which is actually only a few minutes really away from the United States natal moon. That was the position of the moon on the Declaration of Independence. So that's why we look at that moon. And to think that there was a solar eclipse on the moon, and certainly in reference to the Epstein affair, very few heads have fallen. They've fallen in the United Kingdom and across Europe. Norway, the Royal House of Norway, we've had other ministers in different countries having to resign. So there has been quite an effect and coming out around the time of this solar eclipse, but nothing so much related to the Epstein files in America. However, what has come up within 3 days of that solar eclipse is the business of the Supreme Court finally drawing a line and saying, you have great power, Mr. President, but you don't have power in this regard. Congress is there to decide on tariffs. So there are going to be ricochets from this moment. And my own feeling, because when we look at the president's chart and we think about his, the way things are on the Gemini Sagittarius axis, we are none too far away from this eclipse. And of course, Uranus currently is squaring the president's rising Mars and his ascendant-descendant axis. So he is most definitely vulnerable. And as we see these events now piling the pressure on, it is possible to see that there might be some really important changes in regard to the current administration in and around March and the following weeks. And I think that's why we saw the solar eclipse being so connected to the USA chart. We know there is much, much more to come in terms of how America is governed, the nature of the Constitution, all of that, I think, is very much related to the eclipse narrative, as I call it. And, we're going to be speaking more about this particular one on the 3rd of March, but it's still part of the series, if you get what I mean. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm actually going to bring the chart of the eclipse up, and so that we can have a look at it and I can sort of take you around it. Yes, there we are. So in the way that I've been doing it recently is being able to show you the eclipse and have my little arrow here pointing to where I want you to look at. And down on this side, I've annotated the days and the aspects that we need to take into consideration. So the days prior to the eclipse are the 26th of February, Mercury went stationary retrograde. So in fact, we have a retrograde Mercury during the time of this eclipse, and actually pretty well up until, the following 2 weeks. And around the time of the new moon, which follows it. So that is significant, and I will come back to that. The second thing we're looking at on the 27th of February was the exact Mars-Uranus square. So if we look here, we can see Mars is at 0 degrees of Pisces. We see Uranus here at 27 of Taurus. Uranus has about 2 and a bit degrees to go before it enters Gemini. And of course, you would see the Mars-Uranus square more clearly if it was from Pisces to Gemini, but it is nonetheless a square, and the exact square occurred on the 27th of February. Now, because that's in my future, because I'm talking to you on the 22nd of February, what I do know is that Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton are both going to be talking before Congress, or before the inquiry into the Epstein affairs, on the Thursday and Friday of that week. Bill Clinton on the Mars-Uranus square. So we can assume that what's going to come out is going to be fairly explosive, and that the actual the conducting of the inquiry and what happens is going to be fairly spiky. There'll be a lot of confrontation. We can see that. But of course, it's not going to be the only thing in town. I've set this lunar eclipse from the point of view of Washington because it was by far the most interesting lunar eclipse in terms of where it is and how well and easily it is to see the extraordinary shaping we have here. But I did look at Russia, I looked at Ukraine, I looked at Israel, I looked at Iran, and I looked at Great Britain. And of course, the lunar eclipse is in there, and it is making some kind of connection with all those countries' natal charts. But I felt that it wasn't didn't pack such a powerful punch as this one here that we can see, which is the reason I'm setting it from Washington. So let me talk a little bit about that Mars-Uranus square while I'm at it. Mars is the principle of action. It's the principle of passion. It's the principle of war, if you like, or being on the aggressive. I mean, Mars is a planet of war, but it can be translated into ambition and doing something effective about a situation. When we look at Uranus, we're always looking at things that amount to an awakening, something we weren't expecting. This is fairly shocking. This has taken us into new and untrammeled territory. So we could just look at that pairing and think, well, somebody's action is going to take us into new territory, and it's fairly shocking, and we didn't expect it. So we could be looking at that from a personal point of view, if that Mars-Uranus aspect connects with your natal chart, or we can most certainly be looking at it just from a general kind of perspective. And I think, having just come through the week of the solar eclipse and moving now towards the lunar eclipse, there have been a lot of things going on with friends, family, my clients, that are really, really volatile, upsetting, that are causing a huge amount of ruction. And that is the general state of affairs, as above, so below, as in the collective, so in the individual. So this Mars-Uranus aspect will still be prevailing at the time of this lunar eclipse. So it isn't going to fade for at least, it'll still be around for 10 days to maybe almost 2 weeks. So it's going to be there in principle. So the coming 2-week period is a very Mars-Uranus period. It's very volatile, it's very confrontational, it's very shocking, and it's also very awakening in a good way. Not all bad things are related to a Mars-Uranus square. We have to look at all possibilities. And I think anything to do with breakthroughs and inventions and all those kind of things, space, the digital world, there's often a lot going on to do with that. And of course, just recently, we've seen all sorts of things bubbling up about, you know, teenagers. You know, you can't be on social media, you know, until you're over 16. You can't have that going into schools. It's forbidden. And there've been all sorts of other issues over, you know, how social media and the tech giants who run it, you know, calling into question just how much, you know, there should be monitored, you know, things should be monitored. And this is all part, I think, of this Uranian period. And, you know, if it can be sorted and things can work better, then that's great and good. But other times it's going to cause quite a lot of disruption. So we come to this total lunar eclipse. And as I said, I chose America and Washington to look at it because it's quite dramatic. Not only do we see the sun opposition the moon on the eclipse as an eclipse, but we see quite clearly how the moon is separated from Pluto and Uranus. In fact, everything in this little third of the chart, well, it is contained within about 120 degrees. So we've got a tight packed set of planets here, which we can see they're all opposing the moon. And I think if we think about a full moon and an eclipse, and we think about simmering situations bubbling to the surface, we can really see how the moon pulling on the tides of one's affairs out here, opposing all of this. We see a really pictorial representation of what's going on with this particular lunar eclipse and the rest of the planets. I'm going to, as I said, break down this lunar eclipse sign by sign shortly, so I'm not going to get into it to a terrific degree. But if we return again to the idea of the USA, and we think about this being set up for the capital, which is the country, we can see clearly that the sun on the ascendant and in the first house position is about the nation itself. And if we look at the moon, it's in the house of its partners or its open enemies. So you can see the divisions between America and its allies, America and its foes are really polarized at this point. But remember, I talked about union as well. And we can think that maybe at this point of extreme division and polarization, we have the potential to come together. And we should definitely hang on to that. We shouldn't, you know, just think that, you know, that the end is nigh. It's nothing but, you know, confrontation and upsets and all of that. There's always the potential for union within all of this, because that's what a full moon and certainly a lunar eclipse are presenting to us. But here's an interesting point. The moon is sextile the USA sun, which is 13 degrees of Cancer, and the sun is trining the USA Cancer, you know, sun Cancer. And Jupiter here, lovely Jupiter, is quite close, 2 degrees away from the US sun. So we've got a lot of references to the United States in this picture. And in fact, it holds the potential to unite and to grow and for things to prove successful every bit as much as we get a picture of escalation and division. Remember, when we're looking at astrology and we're looking at horoscopes, the planets, their aspects, you know, what we're looking at has the potential for the most positive effect as well as the most negative. And in our personal charts, I talk about the idea of our consciousness deciding, if you like, whether a certain alignment is going to work positively or whether it's going to be at its most negative. And it's the same with a birth chart. Some people born with a pretty similar chart, some will be noble individuals and others will be quite the reverse. And it's our consciousness that animates the chart, and our consciousness that can choose the most positive or the most negative way of dealing or responding to the aspects. I'm not going to get into the whole issue of fate at this point in time. That plays in there as well. But I think a very simple explanation for why you can look at two charts and one person is a saint and the other is a sinner. You're still working on the same spectrum, but it's just that one person's consciousness is aligned, or it works towards the light and the positive, and the other is the reverse, works towards the dark and the negative. Still the same astrological principles. So coming on down through my list here, Venus moves into Aries on the 6th of March, which is lovely. I mean, Aries, we welcome Venus moving through our sign, which it will do for 4 weeks, because Venus is lovely things, the planet of love, the planet of balance, the planet of abundance in many ways. So at least when Venus reaches your sun on that day alone, there should be something that makes you think, you know what, it's great to be alive. But for some Arians, this is the beginning of a very, very important season for relationships, for money, for all sorts of things that you believe are going to add to your quality of life and make life worth living. But as we can see, as soon as Venus enters Aries, and here's Venus on our circle, what is it going to do? But it's going to conjoin Neptune on the 7th, and it's going to conjoin Saturn on the 8th, because, of course, Saturn and Neptune are conjunct, and they're going to be conjunct for a little while. Now, I've talked a lot about this. I spent some time in my previous video on the solar eclipse talking about it. I've done a whole video on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and looked at it from 12 perspectives, 12 sun signs. But this theme that we are seeing, we're so aware of at the moment, we're aware the issue of accountability. Every day you hear somebody talking about accountability. And that is the essence of a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. It's the essence of Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, because it is, Neptune has to do with falling on your sword in a way. Saturn has to do with taking responsibility. You put these two things together, accountability is a huge theme. Whether we want people to take accountability, we are ourselves taking accountability, or we are seeing people in positions of power taking accountability. That's all resonating with that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And I've also talked endlessly about the end of regimes being portrayed by this Saturn-Neptune conjunction. We have yet to see some serious kind of evidence of this. We can see it approaching and we think, oh, it's almost there, but then it falls away again. But most certainly, this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is affecting Great Britain's monarchy. Its whole future existence is in peril as we speak. And we're certainly looking at the likelihood of the end of a regime in regard to the Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, clearly my particular view on this is that it's Putin who falls simply because of the position of Uranus as we get further forward in the year. It will be squaring his moon. It will be squaring Russia's natal moon. And we have the feeling, heads will roll, there will be change. But of course, Ukraine are the other part of this conflict, and it could be capitulation on their part. I mean, we have yet to find this out. But I do think that within this year, there will be a result in terms of what is going to happen in the Russia-Ukraine situation, with definitely my feelings, my leanings moving more towards change in Russia. So all this is relevant as we look at everything going on at this time. And there will be little reports coming here and there about this being a possibility, that being a possibility. And maybe too, we will get a lot further with the realities of certain things that are now just hinted at. And we'll see more of their reality as we get to this lunar eclipse. But last on my list here, 11th of March, Jupiter here turning stationary direct. It's going to move direct. Now, if we look at this in general terms, we think about Jupiter, the biggest planet in our solar system. And with this idea of the gods who rule the planets, we call Jupiter Jupiter because Jupiter was the king of the gods, the big Yahoo. And there is a sense here not only of rulership, but there is also good things in life, expansion, growth, good fortune. These are all things that belong to Jupiter. But so too does the opposite, the negative, inflation, things getting out of control. You could even say extreme narcissism. The power of, power corrupts, absolutely. Also very present and indicated by aspects and the position of Jupiter. And with Jupiter turning stationary direct, we've got all those things that I've just mentioned in play. And it may be that what's been happening in the past 5 months or so, while Jupiter has been retrograde, a lot of things that have been going on, whether that's in connection with the economy, in connection with justice, Jupiter is very much to do with justice, or whether it's to do with rulership, presidencies, or whether it is to do with monarchies. We can see now with Jupiter turning direct that these things are now going to gather momentum, and we will see the results of some of those moves and developments that were happening. On a personal level, I think if we look at Jupiter for the things that we want most to achieve in life and to have in life, all the things that make us feel fortune has smiled on us, it may seem as though those things that are particular in your case have been slow to come about. And maybe you've struggled and thought, I'm out of luck. These things aren't happening. I'm not getting anywhere. But when Jupiter changes direction, there could be a change in the wind. And I think coming back to, what I was saying earlier, in fact, I don't think I quite finished what I was taking up. And I'm going to come back to me now and talk to you directly. I think, what I was talking about, the idea that since the new moon in Capricorn on the 19th of January, and where we are, as we come into March, all these big wave of developments that have happened in this short space of time. When we come to about the 9th of March, then we've got a feeling that we've been through a very intense period, and we have a short period of regrouping, of kind of absorbing everything that's happening, of giving more time to think about what it means, and all of those kind of things, coming back to ourselves. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't other things happening. It's not like suddenly everything that was wayward and upsetting and volatile suddenly stops, peace is declared, peace all over the world. It's not like that. But when we look at the astrology and we see there are no sharp angles, it's rather like, do you remember, some of you, when we had radios, where, we had to tune into a station, we had a little knob and we had to keep tuning it. And if you weren't attuned to it, it made an awful fizzing sign. There was a lot of interference, a lot of static interfering with the signal. Well, that's what it's like when you've got a lot of things, a lot of aspects, hard aspects, eclipses, big important conjunctions going on. It's like there's static and we can't get a clear signal. But from the 9th, we're getting a little bit less static and more understanding. I think that's an important way to look at it. It's not going to last very long because we're going to go into another wave towards the end of March. But let's deal with what we're dealing with at the moment. That's the important thing. Let's take it step by step. Let's put too much on our plate and not be able to manage it. Just going to deal with what we've got. So I think I have touched on pretty well everything I wanted to touch on generally about this period. And I think it's time for me to start looking at what this all means sign by sign. Now, those of you who are new to my channel, I do it from two perspectives. I do it the only thing you know is that you're a Scorpio, you're a Sun Scorpio, then you can take that Scorpio section and apply it to what's going on in your life, and the advice and everything else will apply to you. But if you know you've got Scorpio rising, then it's going to be even more pertinent. The degree you have of Scorpio rising is important, unless, of course, you use whole sign system where 0 degrees of the sign is the beginning of a house, then that's going to work perfectly for you. But if you work on any other house system, maybe not equal house, but certainly, well, yes, even equal house starts from the ascendant cusp. So each house thereafter is that degree and not 0 degrees. So if you do know where your ascendant is, you can figure out where this lunar eclipse is and the rest of the story around it. Okay. Virgo, a lunar eclipse is in your sign. So how much more important could this be? As I explained in the first half of this video, that there have been previous new moons in the sign of Virgo, which this will relate to. And we're looking, I think, more importantly, at the events around the 21st of September last year, having a part to play in what may be happening around the 3rd of March and this lunar eclipse. So we're looking at the area of relationships. The sun is in the 7th house, the moon is in the 1st house. And when we look at a full moon, the moon in your sign, then you are empowered. This is a time when emotions can be harnessed to the will, and therefore you can accomplish things. And I'm sure you felt that sometimes when you've been absolutely connected to your heart, to your emotions, and your mind and will. It's amazing how powerful you are, how powerfully a message comes across. And that's something that's given by this lunar eclipse. It's one of the most important factors about this lunar eclipse. Now, the other thing in regard to relationships, I talked about polarities earlier on, and how with a lunar eclipse, we have the prospect of union and we have the prospect of separation. And it is going to vary from Virgo to Virgo. And of course, if you have anything round about 13 degrees of the mutable signs, Virgo, Pisces, Gemini, and Sagittarius. If you do, then this lunar eclipse is inviting you to close a chapter. Now, you can look at this and think, me and a partner, myself and an organization, some kind of business affiliation, whatever it is, have been through a lot. And maybe it's been so much, we considered calling it a day. But you know what? This full moon has brought things right up to the surface, and we're going to give it another shot. We're going to do things differently. We've learned a lot from what's been going on. And at this full moon, we've decided to draw a line in the sand, and we're going to continue in a new way. So that potential is out there for love affairs, marriages, business partnerships, working associations. But the reverse is there as well. We've thrown everything but the kitchen sink at this relationship, and it's still not working. And you know what? I think the only thing we can do is to call it a day. So that is in there as well. Now, if we look around the chart a little bit more, we'll see that Mars is just made an entry into the area of relationships. It's going to be working its way through there for the next 6 weeks, sort of up until about the middle of April. And Mars in the 7th house is as though people are pursuing you. Well, they can be pursuing you because they adore you. They think you're the bee's knees, or they can be pursuing you because they're pretty angry with you. And we do tend to see who our foes are when Mars is in our 7th house. but also the potential is there to say, all right, I know we're enemies, can we agree to differ? And, you know, if you're looking perhaps for a new position or you're looking for a partner, it's quite good to have Mars in the 7th house, because it means there's action in the department of other people as far as you are concerned. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction is just on the 8th house cusp. So we're getting into the area of finances here. And as you saw when we looked at the chart as a whole, you know, looking at the list of dates on the left-hand side, Venus is going to pass over that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the early part of March, and Mars is going to do the same thing in the middle of April as well. So this is going to bring the whole aspect of financial relationships into the mix. So there is a financial element too to take into consideration at this full moon. Is it the time to cut, to stop paying a certain subscription? It's very mild, isn't it? Is it the time to, make a settlement, to end something? I think that's in this lunar eclipse as well. So it's not just about partnerships per se. It's also about the financial aspects of partnerships and relationships. Okay, Virgo? Libra. This lunar eclipse cuts across the 6th, 12th axis, as we say in the business. In other words, the sun is in the 6th house of the horoscope, the moon is in the 12th house. This is such an important area of the horoscope because it has to do with how life runs. What are the structures of our lives? We have a day-to-day running of our lives. We must earn money. We must have money coming in. We must eat. We must have health. We must deal with our responsibilities. That's the 6th house end of things. But the 12th house end of things is, so what is this all about? Why am I doing this? Is there a big purpose to this? What is my spiritual framework? How is that fitting in with what I'm doing every day of my life? So this could be a bit of a spiritual crisis, Libra. You could be at that point where you think, oh, it's just not worth it. Why am I doing it? There's no point. On the other hand, it could be the reverse. And out of whatever's going on in your life, you suddenly get this extraordinary expansion, this extraordinary understanding of how your spiritual life flows in to your everyday life. And you're seeing meaning and purpose in all of that. So that's one way of looking at this lunar eclipse, in that sense of awakenings and, very much on a kind of spiritual level of things. But we've got to remember this is a health axis. One of the things about how our life runs, I mean, if we're healthy and fit, life runs pretty well. But if we're not healthy, then no, it doesn't. So sometimes a lunar eclipse will expose a weakness in the system. So you become aware that you can no longer put up with a toothache. You've got to get it seen to. There's no longer you can put up with this funny feeling in this part of your body. You've got to get it seen to. And if you have been running on fumes, pushing yourself too hard, then this lunar eclipse will bring you to a kind of collapse point. You realize you can't do it. Lots of things to consider. And if you remember looking at the chart of the lunar eclipse and the dates and the aspects that were on the left-hand side, we saw Venus coming into your opposite sign, and it will be going over the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in that early part of March. Venus moving through your 7th house is normally an excellent time for relationships, for finding partners, for finding business associates, affiliates, for joining up with people. So it's usually a very good time. But occasionally the reverse is the case, and things related to your alliances and your love affairs and marriages, those kind of things, Venus sheds a very bright light on them. And if there's any dark corners, you're going to see them. And by this association with Venus moving over Neptune and Saturn, that can be a moment of great clarity where you feel, gosh, do you know what? My dreams are really coming true. This dream I had of this person, this relationship, my goodness, it's happening. But it can be the reverse as well, in that it's the shattering of one's illusions and that somebody is no longer the prince or the princess you thought they were. So that is one of the things to bear in mind with this. I think really and truly, when we look at what's going on in the whole picture of this, Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn, this is such a time when so many things are in a state of flux, Libra. It's going to be very difficult to take a position on it. And one of the ways you'll be able to take a position is by recognizing your feelings and by putting a label on your feelings. That's going to help you a lot. Scorpio. This lunar eclipse falls across the axis of creativity and collaboration. The sun moving through the zone of creativity and the moon at the time of the lunar eclipse in the area of collaborations. Now, full moons set things in cement. We have this idea of push coming to shove. We have simmering situations coming to boiling point. We have closure and completion. So if you've been trying to get something off the ground, been trying to get a group effort to come to cohese, you've got it working, it's happening, then this lunar eclipse can do just that. On the other hand, what it can also do is expose the fact that really, no matter what you throw at this collaboration or this creative endeavor, it is really never, ever going to work. And the idea is maybe you need to offload it or phase it down in order to let new and more appropriate endeavors come into being. There is a moment for an ending, and sometimes it's a final ending. That's it. There is no more to come. And sometimes it's an ending in the sense that that chapter is ended, but there are more chapters to come. So that's probably another way of looking at this lunar eclipse. So this area has a lot to do with love affairs as well. So the full moon might suggest that a love affair that started 3-6 months ago has reached decision time. Is it on? Are you going to go forward and build on the beginnings that you've created? Or is it now becoming apparent that one of you or both of you, your heart really isn't in it? And it can be that kind of realization around the time of the full moon that happens. But there's another thing about this area, and that is that it is, or the full moon and the eclipse full moon, what it's showing you is that the end of a gestation period has been reached. Now, here again, a gestation period we think of most often in connection with the development of a baby. A baby takes 9 months to develop from seed to birth. So we could be at the birth of something, maybe even a literal birth of a little piece of a little human being. So there is that to look at in terms of some of you, not all of you. But I think if we focus this eclipsed full moon on the idea that everything has seasons, there must be endings so there can be new beginnings. We can be very healthy about what comes to an end at this particular time and what reaches an end but still has further to go because it's a new phase and a new stage. And I know that sometimes, Scorpio, you're quite an extremist. You like things to be black and white. You don't like shades of gray. But I think sometimes that is appropriate and it's easier to handle than making these extreme cutoffs. And maybe that's something that you will find very useful to think of in this period of time. Sagittarius. This is an important lunar eclipse for you, and it's an important full moon because it is happening in the 10th solar house, the 10th and 4th solar houses. These are the angular houses of the horoscope, and they are more dynamic. and they tend to have a greater meaning on some of the aspects of our existence that are central to our existence. In some cases, it's going to mean your career, how you earn money. It may have to do with your social standing, how people view you, people's opinion of you, where your standing is in the world. Or it may have to do with the opposite end of the spectrum, which is to do with home and family. So we've got an ending here. Is it that you're going to move house, change location, even work location? It could do. Or is it that a chapter has come to an end, like the ones we know about when we're parents, that, once babyhood has come to an end and now we've got a small toddler, or the one that everybody really dreads, and it is a difficult period, the empty nest syndrome, when our little ones have grown up into adults and they're leaving home. That's very hard. So for some Sagittarians, it's about that. It's about changes and ends of chapters within the family and things happening that are related to parents or grandparents or the elder members of the family, or in some cases, as I've just described it, a change of from baby to toddlerhood to young child to young adult, those kind of stages, which all mark, differences in how we view our offspring and how our life runs. There is also this thing about life balance when we get a lunar eclipse and a full moon on this axis, because really there does need to be balance in life. We have to have a home life. We have to have time in our sanctuary. I mean, if we never get into our sanctuary, we never get into that space which cuts out the world and is our home space, both in a psychological and spiritual sense, as well as a real sense, then we get burnout and things go badly wrong if all our focus is on work and being out in the world. And the same thing is really true the other way around. If our focus is largely reflective and it's about our inner world and our home and the things that make us feel cherished and safe, and we're not thinking about being out in the world or getting a job or being successful in our job, that's bad too. And it is about balance. So I think for some Sagittarians, the whole thing about career, where you live, the family, what you're aiming for, these are all coming together at this point on this lunar eclipse. And in the wake of it, I think you'll be able to make a decision. Okay? Capricorn. This lunar eclipse is cutting across the axis of the 3rd house and the 9th house. Rather a good and interesting axis, because it has to do with our mindset and with the world. It's how we view the world. What is our world? Both in the literal sense, the world that we inhabit, in the sense of, we live in America, we live in Sydney, Australia, that's our world. We travel to see other countries of the world, but it's also more than that. It's more our worldview. What do we think about the world? What are our opinions? What are our belief systems? What are our values? What do we know that then contributes to how we view things? So this lunar eclipse, like all full moons, says you've reached the end of a journey. Okay, maybe it's real. You have been traveling and now you're on your way home. Or maybe you're traveling and you've just reached your destination. But if you are traveling on and around this lunar eclipse, then certainly the journey itself and where you're going to and what happens at the other end is going to be important. It's also really, I think, an opportunity to really consolidate what you know. Now, of course, that might chime with the idea that you're finishing a course. You're learning a new skill, you're learning some subject, and you've reached the end of it. And maybe you're off and running, you're going to start to work with your new skill. On the other hand, it might be that with what you're working on and trying to advance your knowledge and experience and skill set with, has reached a point where you feel, you know what, I'm not getting this. It's not getting me where I want to go, and I'm not happy with it. So at the time of an eclipse, you're going to have extreme doubts about whether you're doing the right thing and whether you're good enough and whether what you know is going to stand you in good stead where you are, how you're viewing life and everything else. You're not in a happy state about that. Now, there's a purpose for that, because you may decide, yes, you know what, I've been barking up the wrong tree. I've been doing the wrong thing. This isn't right for me. I need to change course. And that would be an outcome. On the other hand, it may simply be that you've reached a point at which, all this has bubbled up. And once it's all settled down, you'll think, you know what, I don't know what that was all about, because I still think this is valuable, valid. I still want to do it. And as I often say to my students, it's the point at which you want to lay down tools and say, I don't get astrology. I don't get it. I'm useless. It'll never make sense. That's almost always the point at which the big turnaround is going to come. And we might extend that out, Capricorn, to other areas of your life where you may feel, you know what? I'm so done. I can't go any further with this. Maybe it's temporary, and in the following days, you'll rally and think, you know what, I'm going to give it another shot. I'm going to keep on. Or it may indeed be the case where you think, you know what, that is it. I am done. Either is correct, because it's going to be correct for you. And I think the worrying thing, especially with the 3rd, 9th axis, is that your mind is overactive. So you're thinking about things all the time. You're looking and weighing things up all the time and trying to get knowledge and trying to do something. And it's very often what it does is become very confused in your own mind. And when we look at that Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the base of your horoscope, which is going to be activated by Venus shortly after that lunar eclipse, if you are feeling confused and you're in a very blurry world, just let things settle, because you're probably going to find, as you come out of that, you're going to discover what is real and what isn't, what you want and what you don't want. Aquarius. Well, there are 2 reasons why this eclipse is important for you. One of them is that, of course, you had an eclipse in your sign a couple of weeks ago. And really from, this year on, for an 18-month period, all the eclipses will be on that Aquarius-Leo axis. So at some point, you're going to have an eclipse that is going to connect with something in your natal chart, if not your natal sun. So we are at the beginning of a very important 18-month period for you generally. And maybe you can think back to the 17th of February and say, you know what? I looked at the day and I thought, this is the day everything is going to change, and nothing happened. But guess what? I'm sure if you could talk to me right now, you'd say, I did think that, but guess what? In the days that followed, this happened, that happened. I suddenly thought about this. The eclipse is a trigger point, really. And at any point before that or afterwards, it's possible to extract the meaning of the eclipse and what that eclipse had for you. So awakenings was a very, very good word to put with that eclipse, because it's squared planet Uranus, which is all about awakenings. And you may have had a bit of a shock to the system. Maybe something ended or something changed, or suddenly things were different. And of course, that shakes you. The rug gets pulled out from underneath you. And I have to say, even sometimes when something wonderful happens, it's like it's unnerving. It's not always easy to grasp the good news or the good development. So what we get with this lunar eclipse 2 weeks later, March the 3rd, is a sense of closing that period. In other words, coming to some conclusions about what those events meant. Now, as I've said to many signs, the idea of an ending is it's done and dusted. We don't need to go there anymore. We've drawn a line in the sand. That's it. But it's not just that, because you can have an ending in the sense of you've reached a stage and that stage is over. It's done. But hey, you're going to begin a new stage. So something doesn't necessarily have to be abandoned. Something doesn't necessarily have to end, never to be seen again. But what it's doing is that part of it's ended. That chapter of this book is over, but a new chapter will begin. This lunar eclipse cuts across one of the financial axis of your horoscope. So financial matters come to a head around this time, whether you get in payments and something sells, or you complete on something, or there's a settlement, or an inheritance comes through, and you can see that that's done. Great, it's done. But it can also, in the same way that full moons bring simmering situations up to the surface, you can get a financial situation really bubbling up to a point where it's almost, it's overwhelming. Now, when a financial matter gets to the point where it can't be handled anymore, there are decisions to be made and actions to be taken. So in a way, whatever bubbles up and comes to the head on this lunar eclipse, it's going to be a good thing, because things will be sorted one way or another. And as you can see, looking at where Pluto is in your chart, in Aquarius, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, Uranus in Taurus, just coming into the sign of Gemini. This is a very important period of your life, and certainly a very important period of this year. And a lot of the things that are happening are meant to be. These are what you might call fateful situations, but there's no such thing as not being able to do anything about a situation, because how we choose to act is the choice we make. And never forget, you have a choice, Aquarius. Pisces, well, the sun is in your sign, the moon is in your opposite sign, so we're looking at the relationship axis. And if you listen to the first part of this video, you'll hear me talking about full moons and lunar eclipses having to do with union on the one hand and separation on the other. So these dual themes are very much in your life, whether you are forming relationships and signing papers, and whether that's with a company, whether it's with a business partner, or whether it's with a romantic partner. You're doing things that bind you ever close together. And certainly an eclipse is a very powerful game changer in terms of relationships. So things are going to be changing in one or more relationships around the time of this lunar eclipse. And they may seem to come out of thin air, or they may be things that you hadn't thought would happen, or hadn't thought would happen at this time. So a lot of things are happening that aren't exactly a shock to the system, but they are changing the shape and texture of a relationship. And one of the things I think we do feel when we've got a relationship situation is that a lot depends on what the other person thinks and does and what their intentions are. And of course, that is true. But we can't leave ourselves out of the equation. And it's what we feel and what we know, what's right for us, what is wrong for us. And of course, that good word we're always using, accountability, taking accountability, is very important. These are things we can do for ourselves. And, sometimes that makes a difference to a relationship situation, simply by adjusting our position or by saying where we're at and acknowledging where we're at, honestly, in a relationship. And that can bring the other person around. So we can look at it in two ways, really. But I think this idea of owning it is very important, Pisces, however you want to play around with that phrase. But we've also got Mars entering your sign. And when you've got Mars in your sign, I always say, you've got fire in your belly. You want to get up and at it. You want to do something about a situation. You want to get moving. You're not content to just sit in the sidings any longer. And it can be a very good thing to have Mars in your sign, as long as you're not just starting arguments for the sake of starting arguments and perhaps being a bit grumpy a lot of the time. Then that's Mars in its negative phase. But I think, especially with a sign like yours, Pisces, and you are very fluid, you like things to unfold, you don't like, confrontation, all of that is a bit alien to Pisces. And sometimes you get into ridiculous positions because you haven't taken a stand, or you've allowed people to walk all over you, or to let a situation go to a point where it's a problem. So I think Mars can be a good thing, and it will stir you to action. And the things around this full moon, whatever happens, whatever you get wind of, whatever the real events, Mars follows up by saying you have to act now. And that's really important. I mean, I think I want to really leave you with that message, because sometimes it's better to stand back and let things unfold and wait and see what someone else will do, give something time. But I think looking at this lunar eclipse, Mars in your sign, Mars-Uranus square, all of these things that are happening, it says to me, you can't take a back seat position. You have got to stand up and really either, stand up for yourself or stand up for what you believe in, and not the same thing. But I think that may also be what this lunar eclipse is all about. It has something to do with that, as well as, relationships playing into the story. Aries. Now, this full moon eclipse is an interesting one because it's falling in the 12th and 6th houses of your solar chart. And these are complicated areas. They're tied together because in the 6th house, this is all about the engine of life, how things run. I mean, when you think about your daily life, it's the engine of life, isn't it? The rhythm of life. We have, we need to earn money to get our engine of life going forward. We need to be fit and healthy in order to have ourselves functioning and able to run our lives. So the 6th house has a lot to do with how life runs and what we do in life that supports us and life, and also the responsibilities we have and the duties we have, whether those are to others or whether they are to ourselves. And we have a responsibility to ourselves as well. The 12th house, on the other hand, is all about what it's all about. Why am I doing this? This is all about, my spiritual purpose. I'm prepared to do this if, I'm going to be not spiritually rewarded, but somehow there is something bigger than what I'm going through at stake. I can deal with it. So that's an important part of this picture as well. So the full moon brings things to a head. So it could be that you have a bit of a spiritual crisis. What's this all about? This is, I put my trust in the universe. I put my trust in my God, and look, it's let me down. Or whether it's a health crisis or some other crisis related to the way life runs and how your life usually is. Is it that you've been doing too much and you've crashed out? Is it that you've been ignoring a health problem and hoping it would go away? And no, guess what? On this lunar eclipse, it comes up and says, feed me, deal with me, this can't go on. That could be very appropriate. But I like the idea of illumination with a full moon as well. And I think whatever becomes clear to you at this time, Aries, whether it's the bigger picture of what life is all about, or whether it's about something that is in your life and maybe hasn't been necessarily a problem, but it's something that you think about a lot and you're not really sure you're handling it correctly or what it's about, or, it's sort of bothering you. I think this lunar eclipse brings enlightenment. Now, we've also got to look at where Mars is, and also Saturn and Neptune. Saturn and Neptune, of course, are in your sign. So Venus is going to come into your sign just after the lunar eclipse, and then it's going to go over Venus, Neptune, and Saturn. So there is that sense of, the veil being stripped from your eyes, so you see a situation in its reality. But of course, what we don't know is whether the reality is beautiful to behold or whether it's not. And that could be something that will apply to you in and around the time of the eclipse. The dawning of reality is another aspect of this. Mars heading into that 6th house for a 6-week period. All things related to your health are important, whether you need to get a grip on eating better, eating healthier, getting fitter, or whether it's that, you need surgery or you need something happening in order to be at your optimal fitness. Many things to think about, Aries. Taurus. This lunar eclipse cuts across the axis of creativity and collaboration. The sun is moving during March up until the 21st of March through the area of collaboration. So there's quite an accent on working as a team, getting social events put together or other projects that demand other people working together as a team. There's an emphasis on that anyway. And there's an emphasis on friendships and also occasionally the sense of, being with your kindred spirits or finding your tribe. There's a lot of focus on that kind of thing simply through the sun's transit of this area. But then we come to a lunar eclipse, and that means the moon is in the opposite area. We get things to do with creativity per se coming into the picture. Now, a full moon like this on the 5th, 11th axis ends a gestation period. And that may speak volumes to you for all sorts of reasons. Maybe you've been working on a project or something has been getting its act together, even a love affair, for instance, and it's taken some months. But you know what? You're there. It's ready to be birthed. But of course, that can be literal as well. And you've had a gestation period and the birth of a baby is due, whether that baby is yours, whether you're going to be a grandparent or a godparent or whatever it may be. It may very definitely have to do with babies. But also, I think we sometimes call things our babies, don't we? We've got a project and it's our baby. So that's another way of interpreting the end of a gestation period. This baby has been cooking and it's now ready. We're ready to see what it tastes like, what it is. Now, sometimes, as I explained in the first part of this video, what we get with a full moon is union. We get things coming together, and there is a sense of overwhelming joy that something has come together in this way. But we get the opposite as well, that we feel everything is splintered apart, that this can never come together again. And it is going to vary from Taurian to Taurian. It's not an identikit experience. But remember, there's going to be another lunar eclipse later on in the year. So this story has not finished. And whatever is being revealed to you in terms of, how, division and polarities work in life, how we see the negatives and positives of things, and how, we can bridge differences and how we can make things work and how we can bring things together, as opposed to saying, this won't work, this is the end. But that being said, I mean, we don't go through life with everything we've ever started still being with us. There are lots of things that we have cast aside as part of life. And this is another useful aspect of this full moon, this eclipsed full moon, in that if something really has done its day, then this is a very powerful time to bring the curtain down. And that may be highly appropriate. Okay, Taurus? Gemini. This would be one of the important full moons of the year, but given that it is a lunar eclipse, it's super important. It's not a super moon, It's super important. We've got the sun at the very top of your chart. So this is the area of work. It's, well, career, actually. It has to do with aspirations, who you want to be. And even if you don't have a career, there's often part of us that says, you know, I want to see myself in this position in the future. I want to do this, have that. And so the 10th house is all about where we want to be, how we want to be perceived. It can be our ambitions, what we're working towards. And all of that stuff can have nothing to do with a career. But this is the career area of the chart. And if a career is relevant to you, you're in one, then this lunar eclipse may well have something to do with your career, especially if you have anything at around 13 degrees of the mutable signs, which means Gemini, Sagittarius, Pisces, or Virgo. So full moons bring closure. So something reveals itself. And when that is revealed, whether it's a decision by a company, whether it is a decision you make with a partner, or whether it's just the way the cards fall and the way events happen, there's a conclusion. Oh, I get it. That's done. You know, that road is blocked off now. We have to go via another route. So there is an ending. But I hasten to say that even though full moons are about endings, they can be the ends of a stage of something. They can be the end of a chapter of a whole book. So there are many ways we can look at this. But when we look at the moon at the opposite point, which is in the area of home and family, things to do with your home and family are just as likely to be in the mix in this lunar eclipse. So is it a time when you think, you know what, we've got to move? Or maybe change location in terms of work, or something changes location. But is it also things to do with the family? Is it the end of a chapter for a member of the family? Is a young adult off to college? Is an elderly figure set to go to a care home? I mean, there are many ways you can look at endings of chapters related to the family. But it can also be the end of a difficulty. So if there's been misunderstandings, or if there's been a rift of any description, it would be nice to think that this lunar eclipse would be a signal for the end of that rift. But occasionally, something becomes hard set on a lunar eclipse. And if you've tried every which way to sort a family dispute out or some other dispute, it may become evident around the time of the lunar eclipse that, at least for now, there is nothing more you can do. Now, going back to the area of career again, you know, with Mars coming into the 10th house, and will be there until the middle of April, I think it is a time when a lot of progress can be made in career matters. Especially the kind of progress that comes from speaking to superiors or people who you need to help you get ahead. But at the same time, as we've got that nice Mars saying, you know, there's energy here, we've got the idea there could be conflict as well. So bear that in mind. It doesn't mean there will be a conflict between you and a superior, but it may be. And maybe that is the way it has to be, especially as we look at that Mars-Uranus square. Maybe it's all happened already, and there you are, you're in conflict. But I think if you can manage it in a way that, you know, you can recognize the need to say something, do something, have that change, whatever it is, without resorting to, firearms, I think that would be a lot better. Okay, Gemini? Cancer. So when we look at this full moon eclipse Cancer, it is in one of the areas of the chart where it can be very useful. Well, I mean, in a way, all eclipses are useful in that they change patterns and they make us aware of things. They move things around our chessboard of life. Yes, of course, they're always going to be useful in some way. But I think the 3rd and 9th house have a lot to do with our world, the world in which we live physically. And that can mean our space in the world. It can mean other countries, people in other countries, our relationship with companies of a foreign nature. And on the other hand, it is about our small world. our world view, which depends on how our personal view of the world is. And sometimes that can extend to our neighborhood, because that's the outlook we have through our window. We can see what's going on in our neighborhood. So the idea of an eclipse here, which is all about closure and completion, could apply very simply to the end of some roadworks that are being done outside your front door. And that did happen to me recently. And I thought, that's very third house. So there could be something in the vicinity that now comes to a head. Maybe it's an issue over where you live, and a lot of neighbors and people are getting up in arms about it and saying, we've got to do something about this. We've got to sort it. So it can be a neighborhood issue, but it can also be that something has been going on for a while in and around where you live is done. So that isn't there anymore. It's complete, and that can be a very good thing. But if we also think about the 3rd and 9th house as being something to do with our thoughts and our ability to learn, our knowledge, what we know about things, then this lunar eclipse can do amazing things for clarity. It can mean we've come to the end of a course. We've been studying something and it's now at an end. Maybe we've got qualifications, in which case we're often running and actually doing something with our learning. On the other hand, it could simply be that in the process of acquiring information, looking for something, we discover something we didn't know before, and that changes everything. There could even be a legal side to what is happening at this particular time, whether you feel you have to get legal with what you've discovered, or whether you are on the receiving end of some kind of legal document that has to be signed, or a process that has to be gone through. And, I've talked about justice quite a lot with that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And that does really, it has an aura about it, this lunar eclipse, a sense of justice being done. Not quite what goes around comes around, but a sense that that's right. That's what should happen. And whether you feel 10 foot off the ground because justice has been done, or whether you feel, well, justice has been done, but you're not very happy about it. I think just saying that, it's at an end. Remember, a lunar eclipse is about the conclusion of something. You have the ability to move on from there. There could be some issues with travel here, especially on and around the 3rd. If you're actually making a journey, it can be more complicated. Things can, delay you. So leave plenty of time for journeys. That's just a very practical issue. And I think the same thing for journeys in information and any negotiation. Leave plenty of time, leave plenty of room open for differing opinions. Remember, we've got that Mars-Uranus square playing into what's going on with the full moon. So it's very easy for people to down tools or get outraged or upset. So that's, when you're in a negotiation, tread carefully, which doesn't mean compromising your opinions and your values. It just means finding out just the way the land lies, okay? But I think I've given you a lot of information there to think about in so many different ways, Cancer. And I really hope that proves helpful. Leo, my last sign. So here we look at this lunar eclipse cutting across the 2nd, 8th axis. Moon in the 2nd house, the sun in the 8th house. This is all about self-worth. It's all about worth. It's about possessions, money, values, the things we share. It's also about intimacy. It's all about the taboo as well, the things that we may not want to talk about, the things that are forbidden. And this is why sex comes into anything to do with the 8th house, and by association, the 2nd house as well. So there's a bit of a crisis here. All full moons, to a certain extent, bring things to a crisis point. And when they're eclipsed, you're going to get a super amped situation coming to a head. So this might be something related to your intimate life, where maybe you feel that things aren't what they should be and you want them to get better, or whether your needs are not being met, or there's something going on here where you feel that you're not being appreciated, you're not being seen, you're not being related to in a very, very intimate and personal sense. So the full moon brings that to a crisis, and it's a good thing because you'll talk about it, you'll get something done about those feelings. But if we put that whole world to one side and think about finances, then something coming to a head can mean you've been juggling finances for a period of time, and suddenly you reach a point and you think, I can't do this anymore. It's impossible. We're the incomings are less than the outgoings. So there's imbalance here, and we really do have to find a way to balance it. So a solution to a financial problem needs to be found. It may be a matter of sale and purchase, so that you are making a big purchase or selling something which is a big deal, and that lunar eclipse says you've done it, you've achieved it. It could be something to do with a settlement, money's coming to you, redundancy, or a settlement out of a divorce, or it could be an inheritance, a legacy, money is coming to you. Again, the full moon brings closure, so that you know what's coming to you, and everybody can sign on the dotted line. But I think looking at everything else, and you went through a solar eclipse 2 weeks ago, you've got Pluto in the early degrees of your sign, so all those planets went over Pluto in your sign. I think for a lot of Aquarians, it's been a very, very stormy period. Sorry, a lot of Leos. It's been a very, very stormy period. And I'm talking about Aquarius because that's in your opposite sign, and it's in the area of relationships. I'm mixing my metaphors here. But for Leos, looking at all those planets moving over Pluto in the 7th house, in Aquarius, it's been a volatile period, especially for relationships. And I'm not going to say things are settling down from this point. I hope they will. They have a chance to settle down. But when we look at the deeper layers of a situation, and often a relationship has many layers, I think what we're looking at here is to reach an end of some period or process that you've been that's been going on with a relationship, and saying, you know what, let's get into a holding pattern now for a little while, and then we can see what we can do a little bit further along the line. Park it, negotiate, but maybe if it's too difficult to negotiate and you want to avoid that Mars-Uranus energy, which means let's cut and run, fight or flee, I think probably better to leave it a little while. But if something has come to an end and you can't be there anymore, you can't be in that company, you can't be with that friend or in that relationship, then that's what's meant to happen. Eclipses are very fateful, and we have to accept our fate sometimes with an eclipse. But you know what? After we've accepted our fate, we get to decide where we go from here. Our free will kicks in, and that is so important in the wake of events that happen, that we still feel we have some power over our circumstances. Okay, Leo, have a marvelous lunar eclipse. Hopefully it will be beautifully enlightening. But if it's if it's a bit conflict ridden, make it part of life, not all of it. Okay. So to my conclusion, and I was, during the course of the week, I do a lot of thinking, and I do a lot of reading and research. And what was happening during the course of the week, when so much has happened in regard to Andrew, and I know I said I might look at Andrew's chart earlier on, but let's save that for another time. I've already had too much to talk about, so I'm not going to include it. But one voice came through all of this during the week, and I really thought it was so appropriate for something that I want to say. And it's in regard to when the world is in so much of a state of upheaval. We may be living in countries where we've got a government that isn't working for us, where we've got things going on that we are so unhappy about, and we feel, what can I do about it? And we also feel, and sometimes lots of people talking about humanity changing, and there's this feeling of, well, why am I not feeling that this wonderful change is happening to me? And does it make me a bad person? Does it mean I'm not spiritually awoken? So there's a lot of confusion. And I was thinking about all of this and wanting to address it. And I came across Heather Cox Richardson, who, if you've never read any of her articles, her Substack is fabulous, or you've never seen any of her videos, make a point. She's a historian, American, but also incredibly connected to what's going on in the world, a very clear, articulate voice. So she was talking about something that had happened to her during the week. She'd met up with a candidate from North Carolina, and they'd had a conversation. And this candidate had said that just recently she had had a conversation with a Tibetan leader, a very wise, spiritual man. And she felt that she'd insulted him, that something had really gone kind of wrong with their conversation. So she apologized and said, I'm deeply sorry I've offended you. And he said back to her, no, we're doing the same thing, but just differently. And he went on to say that everybody has a torch to carry. Every single person in the world has a torch that they can pick up and carry. And nobody's torch is the same. Everybody's torch is different. And you can't carry someone else's torch. You only have your own torch. And that means that in your life, you may have only one thing to do, whether it's to run a country, whether it's to run a food bank, whether it is to paint pictures, whatever it may be, you have your torch, you have one thing. And to pick up your torch and do that one thing is what is asked of you. But also within this comes the idea of what can you do in a world where so much is going on and you don't seem to be able to influence it. This demands a little bit more thought. It still means the doing of whatever we can do. Even a YouTube channel where we're talking astrology is a way of picking up a torch. But beyond that, it's the vision of the world we want to have. It can be our personal world, what we want our world to be full of, or it can be that much bigger picture of what kind of world do we want going forward, or for our grandchildren and for generations ahead, because we need to be forming that world now, at least forming it in our minds and taking steps towards what that can be. And always, when we're active in something, we are more powerful. It's when we're inactive and we don't do anything and we feel we don't know what to do. And, that's when we're anxious, when life becomes a struggle. Being active, picking up our torch and doing what we do, which is unique to each of us, whatever it is, your torch, picking up your torch is what is demanded of you, or asked of you rather than demanded. And that is a way forward to creating the better world that we all want to live in. I thought that was really nice. It sort of really spoke to me, and I hope it speaks to you. So before I go, I should always remind everybody, I'm told this by, my administrators, please subscribe if you're new to my channel, and do those things. It really helps the work I do to feel as though I'm carrying my torch with purpose, and it grows the channel. And I look forward to seeing you in or on my next video in a couple of weeks' time. Bye for now.